They didn't arrive with riches in their pockets, just a weathered trunk, a well-used Bible, and a hunger for more than food. When German immigrants stepped onto Wisconsin soil in the 1850s, they found towering forests, bitter winters, and isolation that bit like frost. They hadn't come just for new land. They'd fled shattered economies, political chaos, forced conscription, and the ashes of the failed German revolutions. Yet from these hardships, something beautiful grew. Food that told a story. With crackling hearths and cast-iron pots, they smoked pork, fermented sauerkraut, and kneaded rye bread tough enough to endure a blizzard. These were not just meals. Each dish was a survival song, a prayer simmered in fat and faith. Every bite said the same thing: we will belong here. And here's the remarkable thing. Many of those very dishes are still passed quietly through generations in Wisconsin kitchens. Stick with us to the end, because the 25 authentic foods you're about to discover didn't just nourish families. They built Wisconsin, one determined plate at a time. 1. Smoked pork shoulder with sauerkraut and boiled potatoes. If anything could transform a frontier cabin into a home, it was the unmistakable aroma of this dish. Smoked pork shoulder swimming in sauerkraut, flanked by steaming potatoes. To German immigrants, this wasn't just dinner. It was a reunion with the homeland they'd left behind. In those frontier days, no scrap of that meat was wasted. Shoulders were salted, tucked into pine smokehouses, and left to cure patiently. When harsh winters knocked, families boiled those hams with barrel-fermented cabbage and humble potatoes pulled from the stubborn Midwestern ground. The sauerkraut's tang sliced through the meat's richness, a flavor only born from wise, frugal hands. It was simple, filling, made for long nights and longer seasons. But beyond the salt and smoke, it carried something deeper, the unshakable comfort that even far from the Rhine, a meal could still taste like home. 2. Bratwurst links with coarse rye bread and mustard. Before brats ever made their way to tailgates at Lambeau Field, they were a lifeline for German settlers forging their futures in 1850s Wisconsin. Every village butcher had a secret. A blend of pork scraps, a few veal trimmings if fortune allowed, seasoned with salt, pepper, and nutmeg, then snugly stuffed into natural casings to cure in the barn's cold breath. When twilight fell, families gathered at the fire, dropping those brats into bubbling pots of lard or even beer. The snap of sausage skin, the sizzle of fat, was the symphony of memory. Paired with coarse rye bread still warm from the oven and a fierce smear of mustard, it wasn't fancy, but it tasted like persistence. Every bite declared, our traditions will hold, even in unfamiliar woods. And today, that same sizzle still rises in backyards and grills, preserving a story that never stopped cooking. 3. Cabbage rolls filled with pork and rice in light vinegar sauce. Cabbage in frontier Wisconsin wasn't just a vegetable, it was a contingency plan. Hardy, dependable, and frost-tolerant, it fed families through the leanest months. And from it came a dish cradled in love and labor. Delicate cabbage leaves wrapped around savory pork and rice. Imagine a winter kitchen in 1857. The fire popping. A mother gently blanching cabbage in boiling water, spooning in ground meat seasoned from memory and yesterday's rice. Each roll was nestled into an iron pot, bathed in tangy vinegar broth, and left to simmer slowly, a humble luxury. That vinegar did more than flavor. It made the dish last. Every bite of tender cabbage whispered a truth. When you have little, you stretch it with heart. Even now, that bite connects us to a past that turned scarcity into something rich and soul-warming. 4. Trout pan-fried in butter and herbs with steamed potatoes. For many German immigrants, pork or beef remained out of reach. But Wisconsin's glacial rivers offered something priceless: trout, wild and fresh. At first light, settlers would cast lines with handmade hooks, often just reshaped nails, and by evening the cabin was filled with the crackle of butter and the scent of fresh herbs. Butter was precious, churned by hand and hidden away for moments like these. The trout, lightly floured and pan-seared until skin crisped and flakes fell apart, became a feast by any standard. Beside it, steamed potatoes and scattered herbs like dill or parsley turned the simple into the sacred. One golden forkful, and they could almost hear the Rhine again, not a memory, but a presence. In that quiet, golden moment, a humble meal turned a strange land into something that finally felt like home. 5. Potato dumplings with mushroom gravy. To these settlers, potatoes weren't just another crop. They were buried hope. Each autumn, hands dug them from frost-bitten soil, storing them in cellars to survive the long march of winter. From those sacks came one of the most beloved comfort meals, Kartoffelklöße, soft potato dumplings. Mothers would grate boiled potatoes, mix them gently with flour and egg, and shape them into palm-sized orbs of comfort. Dropped into boiling water, they surfaced like little lifeboats of warmth. When paired with mushroom gravy, made from wild woodland fungi, brown onions, and rich morning cream, it became a dish that hugged from the inside out. This wasn't luxurious. It was an act of care, disguised as dinner. Every dumpling was a hand-formed reminder that with patience and a little faith, even the simplest food could feel like affection. 6. Sauerbraten with red cabbage and spätzle. When sauerbraten made it to the table in 1850s Wisconsin, it wasn't ordinary. It meant something was worth celebrating. Weddings, harvests, or a beloved son returning from the lumber camps could ignite the ritual. Beef, scarce and precious, was marinated for days in vinegar, onions, and warm spices, a culinary magic pulled straight from the Rhineland. As the roast slowly cooked in a heavy iron pot, the scent grew deep and tangy, escaping through log walls and drawing neighbors from the snow. Alongside it, apples softened red cabbage into a sweet counterpoint, and spätzle, those jagged hand-scraped noodles, were boiled fresh with morning care. This was more than a meal. It told a tale of pride, patience, and tradition. At the edge of a wild country, sauerbraten reminded families that even in the roughest seasons, the joy of gathering could still be sacred. If you've made it this far, you're already tasting the soul of history. So don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and let us know in the comments which of these dishes brings back memories, or which one you'd love to try. There's so much more flavor still to come.
7. Beer-braised pork shank with boiled carrots and parsnips. If sauerbraten was reserved for special occasions, beer-braised pork shank was something else entirely, the everyman's reward. In towns where German brewers had already begun
perfecting their lagers, beer did more than fill mugs. It transformed meat. A cut as humble as pork shank, braised low and slow in home-brewed beer, melted into richness if treated with care. Imagine the firelit scene, an iron pot churning softly, the marrow of the shank releasing into a thick stew of malt, carrots, and parsnips. The air filled with the rich swirl of onions, barley, and smoke, a scent so powerful even the kids paused in play. By dinner time, the meat fell right off the bone, and hunks of bread dipped into the dark, savory gravy became a ritual. This was no feast of wealth. It was built with time, heart, and instinct. A quiet triumph at the end of a backbreaking day. 8. Rye flour. Flatbread with lard, onions, and fresh herbs. Before loaves could rise or ovens could be afforded, settlers baked something raw, rustic, and unforgettable: rye flatbread. Crackling at the edges, baked over stones or cast iron, this bread captured the scent of deep soil and fire. Wheat struggled in the harsh Wisconsin earth, but rye flour, coarse and hearty, became every farmhouse's staple. Women mixed it with water and salt, patted it into thin rounds, and dropped them onto searing griddles. As they cooked, melted lard, diced onion, and foraged herbs, maybe a sprig of wild dill or thyme, were scattered on top. It was never meant for show. It was practical, nourishing fuel, but even in its roughest form, it gave warmth and soul. Fresh from the fire, it paired easily with stew, beer, or a long pause beside the hearth. This wasn't just bread, it was a little home, folded into every bite. 9. Split pea soup with smoked ham, hock and dark bread. When the wind screeched, through cabin cracks and snowstorm shadows covered the land, there was one thing settlers could depend on: split pea soup. Dense, filling, and made from durable staples, it used what could last: dried peas, onions, carrots, and a salty smoked ham hock from the smokehouse. It simmered patiently, slow food, born out of long days and even longer winters. Peas soaked overnight, then broke down into a golden green sludge that held warmth like a fire in a bowl. The ham bone infused every bite with memories of smoke and cinders. Dark rye bread, heavy and tangible, was the perfect tool to mop the last spoonful. This wasn't about indulgence. It was resilience wrapped in flavor. One pot could stretch for days, and each reheating only made it stronger. With every bite, families remembered that even survival could be something to savor. 10. Oven-baked apple strudel, served with warm cream, after days spent sawing lumber, hauling stone, and tending smoky fires. Settlers still longed for sweetness, the kind that tasted like memory. Apple strudel answered that call. In the plain kitchens of 1850s Wisconsin, women without ovens made magic, using cast-iron pans balanced perfectly over coals. Delicate dough was stretched thin as lace, brushed with precious butter and gently filled with apples, sugar, and that rarest treasure, cinnamon. When rolled up and baked to golden flake, it filled the air with a scent that echoed old-world orchards. They served it with fresh cream still warm from morning milking. Rich, silky, and just barely sweet. It was more than dessert. It was a spark of hope, of home, of the dream that even through hardship, beauty could still rise warm from the ashes of flour and fire. 11. Pickled herring with onions on rye and dill garnish, long before electric fridges or ice boxes, German settlers had another kind of preservation: the ocean's wisdom, sealed in vinegar and salt. Pickled herring wasn't just food. It was a piece of coastal memory, carried inland and reborn in Wisconsin. Families from northern Germany remembered it well. Barrels of salted fish arrived by wagon, rugged and briny. Waiting to be transformed, they soaked the fillets, then marinated them with vinegar, onions, sugar, and spices until the sharpness mellowed into something refined. Finally, laid on dense rye bread with fresh dill snipped from garden patches. It became elegant in its simplicity, no fire needed. Just time, patience, and faith in the process. It may sound modest today, but back then, a bite of herring on rye wasn't just sustenance. It was a memory preserved, a whisper from the sea finding its way into the woods and onto a family's table. 12. Whole roasted goose stuffed with apples and sage. As snow blanketed the woods and candles flickered low, few things summoned celebration like the scent of goose roasting by the fire. To German immigrants in 1850s Wisconsin, that bird was more than meat. It was tradition, roasted crisp and golden, raised through the summer on scraps and grain. Only the finest goose was saved for winter's most sacred night, stuffed with chopped apples, onions, and garden sage. It roasted slowly in a cast-iron oven, self-basting in its own rich fat. The skin crackled, the apples burst sweetly, and sage perfumed every inch of the cabin. Alongside, red cabbage and potatoes rounded out the table, hot, humble, and full of gratitude. Before the first bite, the room fell still, a reverent pause before joy. In those few quiet holiday moments, settlers remembered that even in deep hardship, delight could still find its way in. 13. Steamed white cabbage with bacon and caraway seeds. Cabbage wasn't just a vegetable. It was the silent hero in nearly every immigrant home. Sturdy, cheap, and cold-resistant, it never failed. Stocked in root cellars through bitter winters, it offered comfort when options were low. But the Germans knew how to wake it up. They'd start with bacon, chopped and sizzling in a heavy pan, the salty aroma pushing back winter's chill. Then came shredded cabbage, tossed into the fat with a raspy sizzle, softening into something glossy and sweet, a bit of vinegar, a pinch of salt. And those caraway seeds, earthy and old world, made all the difference. This wasn't just a side dish. It was a miracle made from scraps, served with sausage or beside potatoes. It carried its own weight. Even alone, this dish invited you to pause, breathe, and be reminded that the simplest things often bring the deepest comfort. 14. Veal schnitzel with lemon slice and potato salad. When veal schnitzel appeared on a frontier table, you could be sure something good had happened, a baby born. A harvest brought in, maybe just the melting of a too-long winter. Veal was rare, a luxury on the prairie, but German settlers made sure to honor every bite. The cut was thin, pounded flat, dusted in flour, dipped in egg, and coated with golden breadcrumbs made from yesterday's bread. Then came the moment. Into hot lard it crackled, the crust turning crisp and delicate. The cabin filled with the scent of pride, a squeeze of lemon, a spoonful of warm potato salad kissed with vinegar and bacon fat. This was celebration in its purest form. It wasn't just about flavor. It was about feeling worth the effort for once, even now. That first crackling bite of schnitzel brings us back to a time where struggle met joy, and dinner proved both were real. 15. Rye beer braised sausage and sauerkraut casserole. If one dish could speak for the German heart beating in early Wisconsin, this was it. Sausages, kraut, and beer, all bubbling in one glorious pot. Simple, satisfying, unapologetically hearty. Each family made it a bit different. Some used bratwurst, others knackwurst, always browned in a heavy skillet. They were layered with tangy sauerkraut, sliced onions, and sometimes apples, just a hint of sweetness. Then came the soul of it, a generous pour of rye beer, drawn from a neighbor's barrel or brewed in the root cellar. It simmered slowly until the sausages went soft, and the kraut mellowed into sweet, sour perfection. Served with coarse bread, it filled more than just stomachs. It became a ritual, a way to gather and give thanks to both old and new worlds. Before cheese curds and fish fries, this is what built the taste of Wisconsin, one bubbling pot at a time. 16. Buckwheat pancakes, Buchweizen Pfannkuchen, with jam and stewed plums. The frontier mornings were tough, dark, cold, and demanding. Yet few things could stir a tired family faster than the smell of buckwheat on a hot griddle. German immigrants brought buckwheat seeds across the ocean, planting them in soil too rough for anything delicate, and they flourished. From those seeds came a flour unlike any other, hearty, nutty, and meant for sustenance. Mothers mixed batter by hand with buckwheat, milk, and just a hint of molasses for sweetness, then dropped it onto sizzling pans greased with pork drippings. The pancakes browned at the edges, soft in the middle, rising with steam. A stack of quiet abundance, topped with homemade jam or slowly simmered stewed plums saved from summer harvests. They became more than breakfast. Each bite tasted like resilience, rugged and sweet. More than a meal, these pancakes were proof, even in lean times, something good and warm could rise again. 17. Creamed spinach and dumplings in a light onion sauce. Not every plate on the frontier held meat or potatoes. During Lent or tight times, German immigrants leaned into whatever the land would freely give, and it rarely failed them. Spinach, sorrel, and wild greens grew easy in the shadows of Wisconsin's riverbanks, and from these a humble gem was born, gathered early. Washed in creek water, the greens were chopped fine and dropped into onion-sizzling butter until fragrant and soft. A splash of creek-cold milk, thickened with flour, turned it into something creamy, rich, and unexpectedly satisfying. Alongside were pillowy dumplings, quick-stirred from eggs, flour and salt, boiling until tender and thirsty for sauce. Together, they made a plate far richer than the ingredients implied. It wasn't about cutting back. It was about knowing how to turn the ordinary into love, one spoonful at a time. 18. Honey-glazed ham with boiled beets and green beans on a hard-earned Sunday. After endless days of toil, Nothing lit up a rustic table like the gleam of honey-glazed ham. Honey wasn't easy to come by, scavenged from wild bees or traded neighbor to neighbor, so when it showed up, it meant something. German settlers knew to use it carefully, mixing it with mustard or a touch of vinegar, brushing it over a salt-cured ham until it glistened with golden promise. As it roasted, fat sizzled, the glaze caramelized, and the kitchen filled with sweet, smoky anticipation. Boiled beets, rich and earthy, and green beans bathed in butter joined the celebration. Vivid, simple, and full of life. The whole plate bristled with the color of gardens and gratitude. This was more than food. It was a shared pause, a reason to sit, linger, and feel proud. Even in a place far from what they'd known, flavor like this reminded them. Joy still had a seat at the table. 19. Smoked fish chowder with onions and potatoes in rye broth. Before pantries, groceries, or shelf-stable anything, settlers ate what they could catch, and the lakes of Wisconsin gave generously. Trout, perch, and pike glided through icy waters, waiting for a well-timed cast and a little hope. Once caught, they were cleaned, smoked, and stored, their lives extending into seasons to come. From these planks of smoked fish came chowder swimming in deep, rye-rich broth, a modest, nourishing masterpiece. Onions and potatoes slid into boiling water thickened with rye flour, filling the pot with steam and heart. Then came the fish, flaking, fragrant, releasing the story of firewood and lake water that made it whole. Paired with thick slabs of bread, it was more than dinner. It was a preservation of effort, of rest after work, of waste turned into warmth. In every spoonful, there was nothing fancy, just everything true. 20. Lentil stew with smoked sausage and coarse ground mustard. If German thrift was ever served in a bowl, it came bubbling as lentil stew, reliable, filling, and smarter than it looked. On the barren tables of 1850s Wisconsin, lentils were an unsung hero, packed with strength, cheap to store, and endlessly adaptable. Toss in a ham bone or slivers of smoked sausage, and suddenly those humble legumes took on richness beyond their price. Onions and carrots added natural sweetness. But the finishing touch? A spoonful of coarse mustard stirred in just before serving. Bold, biting, unforgettable. The stew simmered all day, thickening steadily until it hugged every spoonful. On nights when the wind howled and the only light was fire, this soup cradled families in smoky, silent comfort, rye bread alongside, a mug of beer close. And suddenly dinner wasn't just practical, it was powerful. In those bowls, settlers weren't just feeding themselves. They were proving that endurance could also taste amazing. 21. Pumpernickel breadcrumb pudding with raisins and butter. In a world where nothing went to waste, even stale bread found sweet redemption. Pumpernickel, thick, dark, and sturdy, began its life as breakfast. But by week's end, it transformed into something deeply satisfying. German settlers mastered the art of making something from almost nothing. A warm pudding, born from crumbs. The bread was crumbled into a bowl, soaked in milk and eggs, sugared just enough, kissed with cinnamon, and stirred with golden raisins saved for rare treats. In a cast-iron pan, it baked slow and steady till the edges browned and the middle gently puffed. When scooped into bowls, warm butter or thick cream from the morning cow melted down its ridges, not fancy, not fussy, yet full of heart. Around that cabin table, no one saw leftovers. They tasted ingenuity, love, and the quiet beauty of gratitude turning into dessert. Buttermilk rye bread soup with chopped onions and ham bits. Some meals don't begin with recipes. They start with refusal. Refusal to waste a single crumb. That's where rye bread soup was born. Made for the leanest months, it took yesterday's hardest stone bread and made it the center of salvation, torn into pieces and softened in warm buttermilk. The rye melted into tangy texture. Into this, settlers tossed browned onions, stray bits of ham or fatback, and just a careful sprinkle of salt. Not too much, because nothing could be spared. The pot simmered low, thickening into a rich, sour-sweet porridge that filled more than stomachs. It quieted fear. 2. No one looked at this bowl and saw scarcity. They tasted legacy, resourcefulness, and care. In a land where life gave little, this soup whispered, "Love always found a way to ladle something warm into your hands." 23. Dill-pickled cucumbers with sour cream and rye toast. When the sun beat down across Wisconsin fields and sweat clung to every collar, settlers turned to summer's coolest comfort, the pickle. Cucumbers sprang up fast in the Midwest heat, and German tradition met them with open arms. They brined, barreled, and buried them in dill, creating pickles sharp enough to survive the winter. But on especially hot days, fresh slices were marinated with vinegar, dill, sugar, and salt, not to preserve but to brighten, just before serving. A cool spoonful of sour cream melted over the top, smooth, tangy, refreshing, scooped onto a slice of toasted rye. It became an afternoon blessing, not extravagant. Never showy, but honest, crisp relief. In every bite you felt exactly what it meant, the assurance that even a humble cucumber could keep your spirit upright in the sun. Fried perch from Wisconsin lakes with lemon butter and boiled new potatoes. For the Germans who made Wisconsin home, the lakes weren't just scenery, they were sacred. Fresh perch, bluegill, and pike danced just beneath the surface, waiting to become the best meal of the week. When a few were caught, it was celebration in motion. Fish were scaled, cleaned riverside, dusted with salt and flour, and fried until golden in butter that popped and hissed. The smell lured everyone indoors, smiles tugging at tired faces. A wedge of lemon, if they had one, added brightness like a spark. Boiled new potatoes, soft and earthy, rounded out the plate. It was more than nourishment. It was freshness, grace, and gratitude all on one plate. The first bite? Quiet, joyful, as if everyone knew. This was the taste of the land giving back. 25 sweet yeast dough rolls with caraway seeds and cinnamon butter. There's a scent that lingers in every old log cabin story, and it smells like fresh bread rising near a fire. For German immigrants, making bread was daily survival. But on Sundays or birthdays, they turned that ritual into something sacred. Sweet rolls began with simple dough, yeast, flour, milk, maybe a spoon of honey or molasses, mixed lovingly in old wooden bowls. It was left to rise beneath cloth while the day's work went on. Then baked until golden, with crusts that cracked like music. Caraway seeds gave it that unmistakable whisper of the old world, a scent carried across oceans and generations. Once out of the oven, cinnamon butter melted into every fold, buttery and warm in a way that made time pause. These rolls weren't just dessert. They were a soft, sweet reminder that even in a wild and unfamiliar place, home could still be made from flour and memory. Today, when you think of Wisconsin, you might picture cheese curds, brats on grills, or backyard BBQs bright with laughter. But beneath each flavor sits a story, one forged in the smoke of cedar cabins. By hands that worked long days and dared to dream in a new dialect, these 25 foods weren't just recipes. They were hymns of hunger, hope, and heritage. A kind of courage you could taste. Every pot of kraut, every pan of dumplings, every beer-soaked sausage declared the same simple truth. We may be far from home, but we will build something beautiful here. At their tables, those settlers did more than eat. They laid down roots. And if you've ever bitten into a brat, spooned up lentils, or savored apple strudel fresh from the oven, then you've tasted more than a meal. You've tasted the soul of Wisconsin. Today, when you think of Wisconsin, you might picture cheese curds, brats on grills, or backyard BBQs bright with laughter. But beneath each flavor sits a story, one forged in the smoke of cedar cabins. By hands that worked long days and dared to dream in a new dialect, these 25 foods weren't just recipes. They were hymns of hunger, hope, and heritage. A kind of courage you could taste. Every pot of kraut, every pan of dumplings, every beer-soaked sausage declared the same simple truth. We may be far from home, but we will build something beautiful here. At their tables, those settlers did more than eat. They laid down roots. And if you've ever bitten into a brat, spooned up lentils, or savored apple strudel fresh from the oven, then you've tasted more than a meal. You've tasted the soul of Wisconsin.